It's such a beautiful day out there. It's almost like spring, isn't it? If you're out of the wind. If you came to hear Mr. Rose, he had a medical problem, had to go in the hospital, and will be talking to us sometime in February or March. And Colonel Mazer has been good enough to come in on a short notice and put a program together. And he wants to talk a little bit about this support cruise today that keeps airplanes flying and kept the airplanes flying, the problems they had in World War II. So Colonel Mazer, it's your program.
Thank you. I think there's a little humor involved here for a minute. When I was told I was replacing Gunther Rose, he is a Luftwaffe fighter pilot.
No, he was a test pilot.
He was a test pilot. He flew with the Luftwaffe, and I was going to suggest to him that if he reads page 153 of the Screaming Eagle book by Dale O. Smith, he would read on that particular page that the group commander, at one of the critiques after a mission, had complained that the German fighters were now coming in on their head-on attacks. As the war dwindled on, their tactics became more ferocious, and as they lost a lot of their leaders, they developed the pack rat concept, where the leader would lead them all the way around, you may remember, and then they would follow the leader and go right through the bomber formations. Well, the group commander was complaining that we ought to do something about that, that perhaps fixing some of our guns in a fixed forward firing position, we could overcome that. He continues that little did he realize that this energetic, astute captain armament officer that he had would take him up on it, which I did, and said nothing. And about 2 weeks later, I went down to his office and took him out to the flight line and showed him a modified nose on one of the G's, where we had 6 fixed forward firing 50 calibers in the nose, 6 of them, fixed. And we put a ring and post sight up and harmonized it to the longitudinal axis of the airplane so that the pilot could use the aircraft itself as a sighting body. So we took it out on a wash and we tested it and it worked beautifully. And on one of the missions, unfortunately, they gave it to a guy whose nickname was Dead Stick. And the aircraft was never fired in anger. That's the end of Gunther Rose. But I wanted him to know that I was the guy, and he messed around with us, we'd have killed him. Thanks for asking me as your substitute for the second time. I'm around anytime you need me. In the past, our lectures have been on a one-to-one basis, personal experiences, and very interesting. And we have the tapes, and perhaps in the near future we're going to take those tapes, running through a word processor and eventually publish them and put them out on sale. Because every one of those lectures were good and deserved to be printed for the general public. Today we're going to take a different approach. The sponsor is the 8th Air Force Historical Society, Utah chapter. And discussing this with our team, we thought that a day in the life of a GI on a bomber station 1942 to 45 somewhere in England would be appropriate as we continue these series of lectures. What you see here is a collection put together by the 8th Air Force Historical Society that we've used from time to time, and it best describes in pictures how the boys live. A pleasure at this time to take a few minutes to introduce a GI who was there on the scene somewhere in England during that time period.
Thank you, Nate. I'm not going to read you the whole book. It so happens that Nate and I were stationed at the same air base in England, and we didn't know each other until we met here in Ogden, Utah. My name is Sam Ross. When the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor in December 1941, I was 16 years old. I remember that was on Sunday. I remember the next day on Monday, I was playing in the Hollywood High School band, and we were sitting in the orchestra pit. This is the days before television, so everything over the radio, and President Roosevelt spoke to a joint session of Congress over the radio, and we had it, listened to it there in the orchestra pit. When he declared war on Japan and Germany at the same time. Being 16 years old, I thought that was somebody else's war, and I kind of forgot about it. 2 years later, 1943, the local draft board sent me a greetings letter. So I was drafted at that time. I happened to be brother number 5. There was 5 of us in the service at the same time on it. We'll skip along here. A few notes from my journal that I thought you might be interested in. November 43, there was an ambulance parked by the obstacle course waiting for customers. November 43, I have about $4.50 on hand, which should be enough for a few weeks. The money seems to go. I spent 90 cents yesterday on a trip into Amarillo for bus fare, breakfast, church collection, and a show at the Post Theater. November 30, 43, today is payday. We stood in line for 2 hours in the cold, and then I got $3.47. Santa Claus is not so generous this year. These happen to be some actual quotes from letters of mine, because when you get to our age, why sometimes our recall isn't so good. Friday of January 44, they caught 10 of us loafing. So we were put to work scrubbing the boardwalks near the mess hall. They had about 70 boys picking up papers in an area of 2 blocks for 2 hours. Another boy and I found 6 matchsticks in a half an hour. No wonder we were loafing. I was on detail down at the Ordnance Department. We were cleaning 30 and 50 caliber machine guns. We had a big, it was an old shell casing that was empty. We would fill that full of cosmoline with some blow torches on the side to heat it, and then we would dip the guns down in the cosmoline and pull them out ready for shipment, you see. Well, the cosmoline boiled over the top onto the blow torches, and the place went up. This was a little wooden building. Says we were lucky to escape. I lost my gloves and my flight jacket in the fire. The building had divided just a wooden wall, and on the other side of the wall was thousands of rounds of ammunition. And when we called on the telephone and told them that ordnance was on fire, why the fire engines really rolled about that time. When I was drafted, I was down at Fort MacArthur, California by San Pedro. I was accepted into the Army Air Corps at that time, and I was actually in the cadet program for a year, but never got into the flying end of it. And they came around in the spring of 44 with a directive, and they eliminated 40,000 of us just with a stroke of a pen for the convenience of the government. I think there was some wording in there by this General Yount. He says, the fact that these current changes are a part of general policy, far-reaching in significance and beyond the scope of any one command. When they eliminated 40,000 in the spring of 44 from pilot and bombardier and navigator training, as I look back on it years later, I wonder if they knew in the spring of '44 about the atomic bomb coming down the line. Of course, we never knew, had any inkling of it at the time, but I just get the idea. That spring I was stationed at Minner Field in Bakersfield, California, and my home was in Hollywood, which was just 2 hours away. So I got some wonderful weekend passes back and forth to Hollywood. The Greyhound bus often had standing room only. I sat on the inside steps of the bus by the driver for the 2.5-hour trip. Give you a little idea of the thing. My brother Dave, who had been in the infantry before and then was accepted into the cadet program, was eliminated with the same stroke of the pen from the cadet program. And because he wasn't originally in the Air Force, everybody of the 40,000 that wasn't in the Air Corps was sent back to their original units. So he was sent back to the 97th Infantry, and he marched through Germany with a mortar on his back, and later on I flew over the top of him many times without knowing it. We'll skip along here a little bit. Now we're into, when they eliminated us, then they came around and said that they needed area gunners. So they sent us to Kingman, Arizona in the summertime. By the way, we spent the winter time in Amarillo, Texas, which is the only thing between Amarillo and the North Pole is one fence post. They sent us to Kingman, Arizona in the summertime.
They've taken it down.
They took it down. And the next winter, I spent the next winter in Rapid City, South Dakota. So that's the way they do it. Down at Kingman Air Force in the gunnery training, they kept us busy studying about turrets, about gun sights, about aircraft recognition, about guns, and so forth. At that time, I was a little smaller, 5'9" and 150 pounds. And so because of my size, they assigned me to the lower ball turret, right here. We'll skip along here. Let me tell you briefly what we shot. We shot 45 caliber pistols. We shot 30 caliber rifles. We shot carbines. We shot Thompson submachine guns. We shot 30 caliber machine guns and 50 caliber machine guns. One interesting thing, in the air, particularly when you're on the waist gun here on the sides, they don't have any computing sight. It's almost like shooting ducks. You have a big round ring and you lead the fighters as they come by on the thing. Partly to learn about that was interesting to me. By the way, I never owned a gun before I went in the service, and I've never owned a gun since. It was interesting to me, particularly there though, that we shot a lot of skeet from the back of moving pickup trucks. They had a high rack built on the side, and we would stand up in the pickup trucks moving along the desert, and then you'd come along and they had these, we called them houses, where the skeet would come out either low or high or this way or that way, and you're bouncing along with the pickup truck with your shotgun, and you've got to quickly see that one, which way is it coming out, lead it, and try to catch it. So it was a reaction type of test. We've been shooting skeet with shotguns for the back of moving pickup truck. In other words, we are moving, the target is moving, and bang, we miss. Today was payday again, $21.60. We also, we went in a swimming pool there and tested Mae West in case we had to crash land in the water. We did ground strafing there from the aircraft. Sometimes we loaded the aircraft so full of ammunition and we couldn't bring the ammunition back with us. And it really wasn't a good idea to dump it overboard. So we loaded every gun we could get. And by the way, as gunners, they moved us around to the position. So one day I'd fly tail gun, another day a waist gun, another day ball turret. And so we were interchangeable, particularly later on if somebody was to get injured and you had to fill in his position. But on these particular ones, when we had so much ammunition, they'd tip that airplane up on the side when ground strafing, go along like this, so that the ball turret could be shooting at the bottom and the top turret could be shooting down at the ground at the same time. And then the tail got out the back and the chin turret out the front. So we were getting out, passing a lot of ammunition out. We also took pictures We shot at a tow target that was pulled by a B-26 bomber up in the air. We flew camera missions of which they had P-39 and P-63s, and we would shoot them, but not with bullets, just with our camera. Then later on they would show the pictures as to how we were doing, as to whether we hit them and so forth. Honest. We got our today was the big day. We marched up to the theater for graduation, which was more like a party. We got our gunner's wings, our diploma, and our rating as a PFC. And then we got paid again. $20 regular play, plus $12.50 for flight pay. I was next assigned to Rapid City, South Dakota, where we had our crew training. That's where they bring in a radio operator and a navigator and a bombardier and pilots and so forth, and they put you together as a crew. At that time, the B-17 was built originally to carry 10 men. Later on in the war, when we didn't have so many fighters, they only had one man here in the waist area that would alternate from side to side depending on whether the other gunners called out whether fighters were coming in at 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock and so on. So at the time I was flying, we only had 9 men aboard. I was assigned to Grafton Underwood Air Base, which is about 80 miles due north of London in the Midlands, right out of Kettering. And some of these pictures around here are of Kettering on it. When we first arrived there, we get a little more of the combat feel of the GI here. Let's see. There were 5 enlisted men on a crew and 4 officers. And the officers lived in officers' quarters, and the enlisted men lived in Quonset huts, like this big picture in the corner over here. And you had 10 men in a Quonset hut, so it'd be 2 crews of 5 each. Our 5 enlisted men, we were temporarily assigned to a large barracks that housed 40 men. These were the ground men, the mechanics and so forth, that lived in the large barracks, and it was, we called them ground pounders at the time. They assigned us there just temporarily because they didn't have room in the Quonset huts. We had to wait for a flying crew to be shot down so we could move into their permanent quarters. All of a sudden the war didn't seem so far away when we saw the personnel come in and gather up the crew's personal effects so we could have their beds. We only had to wait a few days for this move. These are some of the things you're thrown into now as a 19-year-old young man. It comes around that sitting in that orchestra pit was a long time ago, it seems like. We told you about the Quonset huts. We had to ride our bicycles some distance to a shower, and we only had cold showers in a concrete building. And we really looked forward to riding our bicycles 5 miles into Kettering to the Red Cross Club about once a week or so, where we could get a hot shower. So that was, give you a little idea of that. Let me tell you just one little story. The rest of it is pretty much factual as it goes along here. But I have one little story. I had a brother just older than myself that went in the military 2 years before, and I had not seen Harry for 2 years. We knew that in those days you had an APO number, an Army Post Office number, and you couldn't tell where you were. You couldn't name the city or anything like that. All he could put was somewhere in England. So when I was sent to England, I was kind of delighted that there was a slight possibility that I might run into Harry. Harry was a court reporter in London for the Adjutant General's Department. Took shorthand notes, and he had a Jeep and traveled all over England to various court-martial cases, taking shorthand notes. I didn't know all of this at the time, but and I had not flown any combat missions yet. I was there on the base. We were there for, I don't know, a week or two. I can't recall just how long. We did some orientation and some training flights and blending in with the other combat crews and so forth. So we haven't actually flown combat yet. And who shows up at the air base? But Sergeant Ross from London, England. Harry was a sergeant and I was a sergeant at the time. We sat up at the Red Cross Club there on the base till after midnight, having tea and toast and having a good old visit. Hadn't seen each other for 2 years. It was late at night. The other crew, the other 5 men in our Quonset hut were off on pass, so their beds were empty. I asked the first sergeant if Harry could stay overnight, go back the next day. He said that'd be fine. I hadn't been in combat yet. Harry and I bedded down for the night after midnight. About 3 o'clock in the morning, the first sergeant came through. And he went over to Harry's bed. Sergeant Ross, Sergeant Ross? Yeah. You're flying an aircraft 106 on hard stand number 12. Like hell I am, he says. He says, you got the raw Sergeant Ross. I got up, dressed, went to briefing, went off flying my first combat mission. Harry went back to London. He was sweating me out because I had 6 missions in before we got in touch with each other on the thing. Oh yes, I mentioned a bicycle. To get around the countryside, I bought a new Curry Superb bicycle with head and tail lights for night flying. Only 9 pounds and 5 shillings. $37.50. Brand new bicycle. We all rode bicycles. Everybody had bikes. We rode into Kettering about 5 miles in and 5 miles out. You recall that one steep dip there? We had to get off and push them up because they didn't have any, they didn't have gears on them in those days. Just straight ride. We, the 9 men on our crew, we won't name them all and so forth. They were all from all over the nation. My pilot was 21 years old, John Blagg. Our tail gunner was 26 years old. He was the oldest on the crew, and we called him Pop. The rest of us were all, the 3 of us were 19, and the others were 21, 22 years old. I was only 19. I was having a great experience, and I didn't know why my mother was so concerned. Now that I'm a little older, I begin to understand. We were there right near the end of the war, in March and April of '45. Now some of you that were there earlier had, you might say, completely different experiences. By the time we got there, they had pretty well hit the German Air Force and their air bases, so we had very little fighter opposition. But the flak was extremely heavy. Everybody know what flak is? Who doesn't know what flak is? Flak is anti-aircraft fire. Big shells shoot up from the bottom, and they're set to go off at your altitude. And then when they explode, the shell breaks into many thousands of little pieces to pepper the sky. When we're flying, when we come up the flak, it'd be just like a solid screen of black pepper up ahead. And if you're on the bomb run where you can't get out of formation or deviate, why, you just go right on through it on it. Let me just, right at the end then, we were hitting on the last big push when they jumped the Rhine River and when Patton was really moving on through Germany. I had 18 missions at that time, and they were all within 1 month. We were supposed to fly 3 days, be on the ground 1 day. it didn't always work that way, because you might fly 2 missions, the third day might be a bad weather day. So you might be down because of weather, but you still owed them 1 more mission. So you fly down day 4 or something, and then on day 5 you might have to fill in for another crew or so forth. So it wasn't just 18 in a row as such. A few quick deal. I kept a little tiny diary that I had some notes in. So these are taken directly from my diary. Many of the missions that we were running at that time were deep missions. We weren't just running over to the coast and back in a couple hours. Many of my missions were 10 to 12 hours long, which means that I rolled up down in that ball turret down there for maybe 8 hours with oxygen masks on. We didn't eat all during the mission. We ate breakfast, and then later on we ate dinner. So we didn't eat during the mission.
What was it like in that turret?
We'll tell you just about a minute. Well, let me deviate right now and tell you about it. My buddies, they had heaters. The airplanes in those days were not pressurized. Many times at altitude, and I have some temperatures on here, minus 37 degrees centigrade, minus 42 degrees centigrade. You get up at 25,000 feet, and the inside of the airplane many times, it'd be just like the frost unit in your old refrigerator. And you didn't dare touch any kind of metal with bare hands. You always had to have at least 1 pair of gloves on before you touched your guns or anything, or your skin would stick right to it on it. But some of the planes, even though they weren't pressurized, had heating units in them. And for my benefit, the only place that was not heated was down in the ball turret. You're out there in the slipstream, all cold metal. And these buddies upstairs on the intercom would, "It's too warm back here in the tail. Turn it down a little." Or "It's just right up here in the waist." "Oh, it's great in the radio room." All for my benefit downstairs, you dirty birds. And I'm going like this for hours with my toes and my fingers trying to keep the circulation going down there. On March the 20th over Hamburg, Germany, the United States did not have any jet fighters in World War II. We were excited to see 2 German jet fighters. Because of their high fuel consumption, they had very limited airtime. They would almost come straight up at our formation like that, make a pass through the formation, and down they would go, almost like a rocket ship on it. I was watching one with my turret one day, and a